So, when sponsoring parents for permanent residents of Canada, based on your family size, you must meet the IRCC income requirements. Not just for the year that you're sponsoring, but 3 prior years. Meaning, if you've received the invitation to apply 2021, then you must meet the income requirements for 2020, 2019, and 2018. So in this video, we'll cover how to calculate family size, how to read the IRCC income chart, and then we'll cover various scenarios such as the income requirement for sponsorship of parents as a single individual, as a married individual, and then as a married individual with a child. And we'll also look at how these requirements can change when your status in those previous 3 years can change from single to married with a child. My name is Suyash, I live in Toronto, and I make boring instructional videos in my spare time. So whip out your calculators and income slips, let's do some accounting. Okay, first step, you get to this page, Guide 5772, Application to Sponsor Parents and Grandparents. It's linked in the description below, so click and follow along. So the first thing you see when you get to this page is this note. You now need to apply for parents and grandparents online. So the online portal went live July 2021. It's fairly recent, so a lot of people don't know about it. I've made an entire video on how to create an account on the online portal and how to submit your application. So check it out. It should be showing up here and on the cards here and also linked in the description below. All right, but more on that later. So if you scroll down on this page and get to this section before you apply information for the sponsor, okay? So click on it. And then if you keep scrolling down until you reach the income requirement section, there you go. Income requirement for sponsors of parents and grandparents. Basically, this is where it gives you some detailed information about what this process is, how you can assess your income, and how you and your spouse can combine their income if your individual income is not enough. Okay? And if you are a resident of Quebec, then the assessment of income is slightly different. So stick around until the end of the video to look at Quebec assessment. Okay? So let me quickly summarize what this page is all about. So number one, you have to meet the income criteria for preceding 3 years, immediately preceding. So if you received the invitation to apply 2021, then you will have to meet the income criteria in 2020, 2019, and for 2018. Also, quick note, all the invitations that are being sent out for 2021 are for the interest to sponsor forms that were sent in 2020 before November. So if you didn't send a form last year, you will have to actually wait right now. The application to sponsor, the interest to sponsor right now is not open for parents and grandparents. So you'll have to wait until the new form comes out. If you've not yet filled out the interest to sponsor form, then wait until that opens, fill that form out, and once you get the invitation to apply, then you can come back and watch this video. It's still going to apply. Number two, if your income is not enough, you can actually combine your spouse's income with your income and see if that meets the criteria. In that case, your spouse will become the co-signer of your application. Number three, once you have all the income information in place, you will put that information in Form 5768. I'm going to make another video on Form 5768. So you list your SIN number so that the IRCC can actually request CRA, the Canadian Revenue Agency, to get your income details. Okay, so there's a lot of confusion about whether the income has to be inside Canada or can be earned from outside Canada also, which means can be foreign income also. So before I answer that, let me point your attention to this Help Center page. I'm going to link it in the description below so you can read it for yourself. But if you scroll down below the income chart, there is a footnote that says, to prove you meet the income requirements, you must include your notice of assessment from the Canada Revenue Agency for the last 3 tax years before you apply. What this means is your income has to be for the previous 3 taxation years, January through December, inside of Canada. Only then can you provide the taxable information from Canadian Revenue Agency. So it doesn't say anywhere that the income can be earned outside of Canada. So make sure before you apply that the income, whether individual or collective if you're using a co-signer, has been earned inside of Canada and has been reported to the Canadian Revenue Agency by way of the T4 income slip. Some people actually have said that you might be able to get away as long as you provide the income which matches the criteria listed here, even if it is in another currency. But it does not say that on the IRCC official website. So be safe, use Canadian income, okay? And if you're still confused, the best option is to call IRCC and verify. Number 4, on the guide 5772, it clearly says that there is no requirement that you, the sponsor, or your co-signer have been permanent resident, Canadian citizen or status Indian for the 3 years immediately preceding your application to sponsor. However, you must be a Canadian citizen, permanent resident or status Indian living in Canada when you submit the application. So this basically means that in the previous 3 years, 2020, 2019 and 2018, you may not have been a permanent resident. You just became a permanent resident in 2020 or you have been a permanent resident since 2019. Let's say you were on a work permit in 2018. You would still have to list Canadian income earned inside of Canada and report it to the Canadian Revenue Agency for those 3 years. You could have been in an open work permit and you became a permanent resident, and now you are sponsoring your parents. You can still sponsor your parents as long as right now you are living inside of Canada and you are a permanent resident or citizen of Canada. Okay? It doesn't mean that you can actually live outside of Canada in those 3 years and still sponsor your parents as long as you are living in Canada now. It doesn't mean that. So don't get confused by that. Okay? So that's basically the summary of this page. Alright? So let's get to calculating the family size. Okay, so if you scroll down, you get to the calculate the family size section. Okay, and you can read the basic information here about how IRCC determines the family size. But essentially, there are 2 steps to calculating your family size. So first, we'll cover a few scenarios on how to calculate family size, and then we will proceed to the income criteria for that family size. Okay, so scenario number 1. You as a single individual are a permanent resident living in Canada and you want to sponsor your mom and dad who are not in Canada. So the family size is you plus your mom and dad, 3 people. All right. Number 2, you are in Canada, permanent resident obviously. You are married, which means your family size is 2, and you want to sponsor your parents, which means the total family size becomes you, your spouse, and your mom and dad, 4 people. All right. Number 3, you are married and you have a child. You are a permanent resident of Canada and you want to sponsor your parents. So the family size now becomes 5. 3 people in your family, you, your wife and your child, and 2 your parents who are not in Canada. Remember, this is the sponsor's parents. So 3 plus 2, 5 people in the application, and that's how you'll select the income criteria. All right. Then once you've calculated your family size, then there is another section here. It says, after calculating, add any other person you and your co-signer have sponsored in the past, whom you are still financially responsible for. Okay, so let's take a hypothetical example. Let's say I sponsored my younger brother who was 18 years of age at the time, and I am still financially responsible for him, which means he's still financially dependent on me. Then I will have to add him also in my total family size. All right. Okay, so now that we are done with the family size calculation, let's actually see what the income requirements are. Okay, so if you scroll down, there will be a chart here by IRCC, which we are going to use. And there is information about family size changing, and we are going to look at it also. So you come to this chart and let's look at it case by case. Number 1, you're a single individual as a permanent resident in Canada and you are sponsoring your parents. Okay, so as we discussed, the family size becomes 3. So this is the criteria that you will fall under, 3 people, which means for 2020, you will have to show that you earned at least 39,672 Canadian dollars or more. For 2019, you earned at least 50,414 Canadian or more. And for 2018, 49,641 Canadian or more. Okay. Now, this is before tax income. Okay. So this is the gross income. And you might be wondering why the 2020 income is lower than 2019 and 2018. There seems to be a trend from 2018 to 19. The income requirement is increasing, but it actually goes down in 2020. And this is a COVID stipulation relief provided by IRCC. So that's why the income is lower. If you do this down the line, let's say 2022 or 2023, this number may actually be higher than the 2019 or 2018 number, okay? So don't get confused by that. Okay, so now let's look at the married individual scenario. This gets a little complicated because your situation changes in 3 years, okay? Your situation can change from single to married to being a parent and sponsoring. So your family size will change over the 3 years. That's why we are going to divide this next section into a couple of scenarios, and we'll cover how to calculate family size and income for each of those scenarios, all right? So let's look at number 1. Let's assume you were married in 2018. You've received the invitation to apply 2021. So you will have to provide income requirements for 2020, 2019 and 2018. But you have been a married individual since 2018 and you don't have a child. Which means, what is your family size? You, your spouse, and your parents. So you are a family of 4 people and you have been a family of 4 people since 2018. So it's obvious that this is the row that you are going to select. 48,167 or more for 2020, 61,209 or more for 2019, and 62,701 or more for 2018. This is your income requirement. It has to meet this criteria. Okay, so now let's look at the next scenario of married individual. Let's assume you were single in 2018, you got married in 2019, and you are sponsoring in 2021. All right? So your family size is clearly changing over the past 3 years. All right? So how do you go about that? Basically, when you were single in 2018, you were a family of 3 people. Remember, you and your parents. So the income requirement that you must meet is 49,641 Canadian dollars or more, because you classify under the 3 people category for 2018. All right? 2019, you got married. So now your family size increased by 1. So now it's you, your spouse, and your parents. Doesn't matter if your spouse is living with you in Canada. As long as you're married, you will have to account them in the family size calculation. So 2019, you became a family of 4, and that's why your criteria changed from 3 to 4 people in 2019. All right? And 2020, you were still 4 people. Let's assume you did not have a child up until 2020 or 2021, then you still classify under the 4 people category. All right. So single in 2018, 49,641, classify under 3 people. Then you got married, you became 4 people, 61,209 will be your minimum criteria. And for 2020, you did not have a child, so your family size stayed constant at 4. So 48,167 will be your minimum criteria. All right. Let's complicate this even further. Let's look at the third scenario. Let's assume you were married in 2018, you had a child in 2019, and you are sponsoring for 2020. So your family size changed again. In 2018, you were married without a child, so you were a family of 4. You, your spouse, and your parents. Remember, this is just the sponsor's parents. All right. So you classify under the 4 people category for 2018, which means for 2018, you will have to show at least 60,271 Canadian dollars or more. Then in 2019, you had a child. Okay. So then your family size increased from 4 to 5. So now you will classify under the 5 people category for 2019. Which means you have to show 69,423 Canadian dollars or more for 2019. Let's assume your family size did not change after that. For 2020, it remained constant. So now you're still a family of 5. You, your spouse, your child, and your parents. 5 people, and that's why you classify under 5 people. 54,630 Canadian dollars or more. And remember, these numbers can change, so always get to this page to get the latest numbers. IRCC will definitely update them in the years to come, so definitely use this page to get your most recent numbers. All right. So this was the situation when your family size changes over the past 3 years before sponsoring your parents. And that's why I wanted to point your attention to how family size can change. Okay, I know I have not covered a lot of other scenarios, but I've given you a solid foundation on how to calculate the change in family size. It's not always linear, as you can see. The requirement can change from one category to the other category as you move from one year to the other. Okay, so that was the calculation for all provinces other than Quebec. Let's look at what to do for Quebec. So if you scroll up to the income requirement section, income requirement for sponsors, under Quebec, you'll see assess your income. Okay, so you click this link and the Quebec immigration page is going to open up. All right, and it clearly explains the family size and the basic annual income required. And there's two different tables which have detailed explanation about the family size and the income requirement. But if you scroll down, there is an electronic calculator. All right, so let's click on the calculator and see how much income you need if you're sponsoring your parents. All right, so there's a couple of boxes here that you have to provide answers for, and then based on your selection, the tool actually gives you the income that you must show currently for sponsoring your parents. Okay, so it doesn't have a prior 3-year period analysis like we saw in other provinces, but what it gives you is the basic requirement of income for this current year. Okay, so let's try to calculate what is your income requirement for Quebec. All right, so under A, family unit, it asks indicate the total number of persons in your family. So let's assume it's just you and your spouse, and you as a sponsor are sponsoring your parents. All right, so the total number of persons in your family will be just 2, you and your spouse. All right, so select 2. Then part B, sponsored family unit, indicate the total number of sponsored persons. This is where you put 2 because you're sponsoring your mom and dad. All right, the sponsors mom and dad. Part C, persons covered by undertaking still in effect. So what does this mean? Undertaking still in effect means that you as a permanent resident of Canada must have sponsored someone in the past. Are they still a permanent resident, and is their resident status still valid? So if you sponsored your wife or husband and they are still permanent residents, then the undertaking is still in effect. All right, so then you are going to select 1 and then indicate the total number of sponsored persons under the age of 18. So let's assume you don't have anyone under the age of 18. Indicate the total number of sponsored persons aged 18 or over. So let's just select 0 for all the other undertakings. Let's assume you've only sponsored 1 person after you became a permanent resident of Canada. Let's say that person was your spouse, and now you are sponsoring your parents. All right, so we are just going to select 0 for these ones. So now when you hit calculate, it gives you a breakdown of your selections and the total amount required for you to have a gross annual income of 77,591 for the prior year. Okay, now a lot of people have this confusion because I'm already listing my spouse in my family. Do I have to provide that person's details again in the undertaking one? Because you're already responsible for 2 people, why do you have to provide the undertaking section also? It simply increases this value. Okay, so let me explain what I'm talking about. If you go back and let's say you select 0 in the undertaking, all right, which means you've not sponsored anyone, but you already have a spouse, so your family will still be 2 and the sponsored persons will still be 2, so you have a total family of 4. All right, and then if you hit calculate, the income requirement drastically reduces from 77 Canadian to 59,597. All right, but the problem is that's not really true. You have actually a undertaking that is still in effect. You sponsored for your spouse and they got the permanent residence of Canada and it is still in effect. So you will have to list 1 here. Now, I'm not an immigration consultant, so don't take my word for it. This is just my understanding. I'm also confused about this actually. So the best option would be to contact IRCC and clarify it with them, because this is confusing to me also. What I feel is that if I'm already listing the number of persons in my family as 2, me and my wife, and I'm sponsoring my parents, mom and dad, then this 2 and this 2 should be enough, 4 people. Why do I have to list the undertaking also? All right. So I don't really understand this section. Let me put it out there. Clarify this with IRCC and only then make your choice. But I just wanted to give you a feel of how you calculate the income requirement for Quebec. I'm going to link this page in the description below so you can use it to calculate your own family size and income requirements. But please confirm this with IRCC, okay? Okay, that was it for income requirements and family size. Obviously, I didn't cover every possible scenario, but what I explained should give you a good foundation on how to do your own income requirement calculation. Also, in the coming weeks, I will be making more videos on parental sponsorship, including list of forms, how to submit the application online, and detailed step-by-step form tutorials. So subscribe if you haven't already so that you don't miss those updates. This is Suyash from Hit Submit and Canada. I'll see you in the next one. And congratulations on deciding to invite your parents here. Canada is a heaven for senior citizens, as long as you can keep them warm and cozy. Good night.